come here, I still have butterflies in my stomach. You know, I don't think I'll ever get used to that, and I pray that none of us will, those of us that stand behind this pulpit, ever get used to the fact that when we stand behind this pulpit, we can do it on our own. It's only because of God that we are able to do the things that He allowed us to do. Other than that, we'd be helpless totally. Paul, you're right there. Let's go over the piano, Paul. I feel like a song. Paul and I did a recording about a few weeks back, and one of my favorite songs from. We haven't rehearsed this, by the way, but we've done this many times, several times. And I'm sure he can just do this. It's a familiar song to many of you, and one of my favorites, and some of your favorites as well. And it's His Eyes on the Sparrow. Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven home? When Jesus is my portion, my constant friend is He. His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. For His eye is on the little sparrow, and I know, yes, I know, He watches the story of a man who was walking across a wide road and he was hit by a car. And the impact of that knocked him on his head and caused him to be in a coma for at least a couple of years. When he finally regained consciousness, he opened his eyes and saw his loving wife right there at his bedside, holding his hand. And he said to her, "You know, Judy, you've always been right by my side when I was a struggling college student. I failed again and again and again, but you were always there with me, encouraging me to go on, keep on trying." And so I did. college, he says, well, I went out for all my job interviews and I failed to get any job offers. And you stayed with me, you were there. As a matter of fact, you were there cutting out more classified ads for me to check on. And then I started work at this little firm and finally got the chance to handle a big project. But I blew it because of a little mistake that I made. And you were there beside me all the way. And then I finally got another job after being laid off for some time. But I can never seem to be promoted, and my hard work never seemed to be recognized and appreciated. And so I remained the same decision from the day I joined the company until now. And through it all, you were right there by my side. Now, you imagine his eyes are starting to fill with tears. And she listens to him intently, and he says to her, now I've been at this accident. When I woke up, you are the first person I see. Judy, there's something we'd like to say to you. We wanted to say this to you for a long time. Now, he's really getting emotional and tearing. And then he said, Judy, I think you're just plain bad luck. Well, those of you who didn't get it, ask your neighbor. I wonder sometimes if there are days when we treat God that way. Every time something bad happens to us, God is right there with us. He's there getting us through the right, tough, tight spots, holding us up, giving us strength. And instead of appreciating and being grateful, we sometimes tend to blame God when bad things happen to us. There's a woman in our story today who does just that. Turn your Bibles to 1 Kings 17, 8 through 16. Our passage today is about the widow who fed Elijah the prophet. She had only a little flour and oil left with which to bake bread, but it lasted until the drought ended because she was faithful. Now, to fully appreciate what is happening, I'd like us to backtrack a little, okay? In the first 7 verses of 1 Kings 17, Elijah announces that there is going to be a severe drought in the land without rain or dew. And Elijah then heads out to a little stream, Brook Cherith. God commanded then the ravens to feed him there. With the food that the ravens brought and the water in the stream, Elijah was taken care of quite nicely. Then the stream dried up, and Elijah now had no water to drink. And that is where today we'll pick up the passage of the story. So if you turn to that, I'm going to read it. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. If you're into underlining your Bibles, or writing, you please circle there. So I have commanded a widow there to provide for you. So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, indeed a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, Please bring me a little water in a cup that I may drink. And as she was going to get it, he called to her and said, Please bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. So she said, As the Lord your God lives, I do not have bread, only a handful of flour in a bin and a little oil in a jar. And see, I'm gathering a couple of sticks that I may go and prepare for myself and my son, that we may eat it and then die. And Elijah said to her, Do not fear, go and do as you have said, but make me a small cake from it first, and bring it to me, and afterward make some for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord God of Israel, the bin of flour shall not be used up, nor shall the jar of oil run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain on the earth. So she went away and did according to the word of the Lord, this Elijah, and she and he and her household ate for many days. The bin of flour was not used up, nor did the jar of oil run dry, according to the word of the Lord, which Elijah spoke. Do you remember the show Unsolved Mysteries? This was at the time when Robert Stack was the host of the show. The show investigated mysterious, sometimes unexplainable happenings, and they investigated missing persons, unsolved crimes, unexplainable, generally strange things that were going on. And I can just picture Robert Stack investigating this particular story in 1 Kings, and he's standing outside the widow's house with his trademark trench coat. There he is. And he talks with some nasal kind of, he says, I'm standing outside a small house in the city of Zarephath, where some unusual things have been happening. A poor widow, and I mean a poor widow, lives in this small house just behind me. As you have heard, there's a severe drought in this area. Food is in short supply, and rationing has begun. But this widow has reportedly had an unending supply and rationing of oil to feed her family. And we also heard that there is a man that's living with them in this small house. Now we are going to find out what exactly is the relationship between this poor widow and this man, who they say is a prophet named Elijah. Now, she has not been to the market to buy flour or oil, other goods for months. Well, tonight, that is why we're here. On Unsolved Mysteries, we will investigate this matter. Is it a case of the widow having a secret supplier? Or is it a case, as she claims it, a miracle from God? You decide. Tonight, stay tuned as we dig deeper into this mystery. A miracle or a hoax? That's a sorry impression of Robert Stack, isn't it? Now, what constitutes real giving to God? What is your take or wisdom about giving? In your mind, what constitutes a real gift? Now, my grandkids think, 3 of them, think that homemade stuff, i.e. cards that you make at home, or drawings, or any kind of homemade toys, etc., are not real gifts. Real gifts to my grandkids have to be bought from the department store, right? You have to pay in exchange for something. About 2 or 3, 4 Christmases ago, we were putting together a little gift for Ken and Len. We took pictures of our grandkids and we were putting it together, and they saw it and they said, "What are you doing, Grandpa?" "Oh, we're going to, this is going to be a gift to Mom and Dad." I said, "That? A gift? How much?" "No, we didn't spend anything." "Well, that's, as far as they're concerned, real gifts, you've got to spend something. What about you? What constitutes real giving to God? What do you think real giving to God is? What kind of giving pleases Him, honors Him, advances His work, advances His kingdom, extends His work on earth? In our passage, Elijah has just announced a God-ordained drought. People are destitute. They're screaming for food. And Elijah has the audacity to ask the single mom to give him not just one meal, mind you, but he is really looking forward to staying and being fed by her for at least 2 years. His challenging request is actually a service to her. In other words, it really was for her benefit. It gives her the opportunity to give in a real way to God by way of the prophet Elijah, this man of God. And then to see God miraculously provide for her and her son. Real giving to God puts God first and trusts Him to supply. Now, real giving develops our trust in God, not in our possessions, not in our jobs and money and what we have. Real giving develops our trust in the God who supplies. And as we move through this story, I want to challenge you this morning to evaluate your giving. Is it real or is it pretend? We need to evaluate that today. Now, here's what I've found. Whatever and whenever you find real giving, you will always find a history of God coming through with His abundant and miraculous provision. In this particular time frame, God was trying to get Ahaz's attention by sending Elijah to him to announce this multi-year drought. And as soon as the announcement was made by Elijah, God then directs Elijah to go to the wilderness to hide from Ahaz's evil. But as he sends him into the wilderness, he promises Elijah that he will provide for his need through ravens. Yes, birds, blackbirds. He said in verse 4, I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. Say there. There, say it again. Amazing, isn't it? Two great things happen. One, Elijah obeys. Two, God supplies. Now, I think Elijah's obedience here is phenomenal. I mean, a wilderness place is a great place for hiding, but not the best place for surviving. And yet Elijah obeys. He goes immediately, without any question, to this wilderness, and he puts himself in a place of total, complete dependence on God, on His promises, because nobody else is going to provide for him there. Now notice, folks, that in order for God to provide for Elijah, he had to go to the very exact place that God directed him to go in the wilderness. That there was the place of provision. I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. And he said, in other words, he had to be there in the place where God has instructed him to go in order to experience firsthand God's miraculous provision. He had to be there. There. And that is what happened. God sends these wild ravens every morning and every evening, to feed this prophet who obeyed. He supplies not only in abundance, but with gourmet meals, man. Meals on wings. That's what it was. And he provides him with meat. Think about that for a moment, will you? Think about that for a moment. Even then, there was not, even when there was no drought in the land, meat was a luxury. A delicacy in that area. God provides this particular prophet in a very abundant, rich way. Every morning the ravens bring ordinary bread, and every morning they bring extraordinary meat, ribeye. It was the same thing in the evening. And the prophet Elijah obeys God, and God comes through with gourmet abundance. There, right there, the place of God's provision is there. After this period of obedience and God's provision, the brook dries up. The need then arises again, and Elijah must have water. And this time, God comes through with some even wilder instructions to the prophet. And because of God's vast supply, Elijah is now ready to obey again. Right? Now watch this. He is commanded to leave the area by the brook Cherith and go across Israel to a Gentile area controlled by the wicked in-laws of Ahaz. And he is to go to an area of great danger for himself. These are just crazy instructions from God. And here is the craziest part of the story. Elijah is supposed to go there and find one of the poorest people in the land, a widow, a single mother, who is already overstressed, trying to feed her family, and Elijah is supposed to look to her for food, to provide for his need. It's just crazy, just crazy. So what did the man of God do? He immediately obeyed. Why? Because of history. He just had his personal encounter with God, a very fresh encounter with the Lord God, where God miraculously provided for him through the ravens, and that personal encounter, that experience of God's divine and miraculous provision, that history gives him the confidence to give himself to God again and obey again. So off he goes without any counter-proposal, without questions, without any kind of second-guessing. God did it here in the wilderness. He is going to do it again. Listen, if you are going to be a real giver to God, you've got to be a lover of history. What I mean is this: you have to look and examine the history of God's provision in the Bible and in other people's lives, as well as the history of God's divine provision as far as you're concerned. My own history with God's miraculous provision includes the time when we moved from the Philippines to the United States. This was right after the announcement of martial law by the then President Ferdinand E. Marcos. Ken was 6 months old. We sold everything we had to sell. All my guitars that I bought that today would bring in a lot of money, and my Fender amps and everything that I had, we had to sell those to raise money for our fair. I was already a green card holder. I was already an immigrant here in the U.S. at that time, but Sonia and Karen, they were not, and I had not applied for their visa yet at that particular time. And so after we sold all our stuff, we resigned from our pastoral responsibilities in the Davao City Foursquare Church. And at that time, we then flew to Manila and stayed with my brother Rudy in Santa Cruz, Manila. And then I went to the embassy to apply for Sonia's and for Ken's immigrant status visa at the U.S. Embassy on Rojas Boulevard. And given the political situation at that time, it was just crazy, man. I mean, near impossible. All right? And then while we were there waiting for them to be called to the embassy for the interview, I got a call from Hawaii. It came through asking me to be guest soloist for the Hawaiian Full Gospel Businessmen's International Convention that was to be held in downtown Honolulu at the Sheraton Hotel there, and that they were willing to foot the bill, my fare, my travel. So I left in January of that year after Sonia and I spoke about it and prayed about it. We felt that I needed to come first. So I went to Honolulu. My plane ticket was only as far as Honolulu. I had no money and fare to come to Los Angeles, which was my destination. But a Bible study group that I was invited to share with took a special offering that night, and wouldn't you know it, the exact fare, airfare, to the penny came in that night on a Kentucky Fried Chicken box, empty box. And when I arrived in Los Angeles after a week, I got a call from an evangelist in Canada that I met at the Waikiki Beach Chaplaincy, where I was asked to sing right on the beach of Waikiki, just outside the Sheraton Hotel. He was on vacation with his staff, and he heard me sing, and he asked me if I would be interested in joining him on his evangelistic tour in Canada, starting in Vancouver, going to Calgary, and on to Medicine Hat. And so he called me, and so I said, "Your plane ticket, we're going to mail it to you if you're still interested." And I said, "I am." So off to Canada I went for over a month. When I returned back from Canada to Los Angeles, Foursquare Missions International Department office scheduled me for a series of missionary meetings in Northern California, particularly in Modesto and the area in Stockton. The morning of the day before leaving for Northern California, I got a call from the president of Foursquare's personal assistant, and he wanted to know if I would be interested in working for KFSG-FM in Los Angeles, the radio station owned by Foursquare. That afternoon, I went into the office for an interview, filled out forms, etc. And upon my return from Northern California, I was hired to work for KFSG. And with that employment, not only was I to receive a monthly income, but I was also provided with a partly furnished apartment, $90 a month. That was all. Now all I need was my family. All I need is Sonia and Ken. But they are now stuck in the Philippines, and it seemed like the U.S. Embassy was not processing any visa applications, especially immigrants' visas, due to martial law. But because of my work at KFSG as assistant radio station manager at that particular time, and because KFSG is a member of the Southern California Broadcasters Association, and also because, the politicians would like to maintain a good working relationship with the media, those of us in the media, I put a call to the office of the then Senator Alan Cranston, who then put me through a contact in Washington, D.C., and what has dragged on for months, trying to get Sonia and Ken to join me in the U.S., took just a couple of weeks to process their immigrant visa status. And so it was, in late December of that year, 73, I drove to the Los Angeles International Airport with Audrey Meyer and Charles Meyer to welcome Sonia to the US of A. That's only a little portion of my history of God's miraculous provision. There are a lot more. Listen, folks. If you're going to become a real giver, you have to become a lover of history, a history of God's miraculous provision in your life. The sun beats down unmercifully upon the tiny town of Zarephath, a remote village well to the north of the land of Palestine. It is there that a frail widow searching for sticks. Why is she searching for sticks, you ask? She is searching for sticks because she has no more fuel and must find something to help her prepare one last meal for her and for her son. You see, it hasn't rained for almost 3 years in this area. The land is hard and the land is dry and barren and parched. There is a terrible famine in the land, and as usual, the poorest are hit the hardest. And this particular widow has resigned to the fact that there is nothing else she can do to sustain her own life. But for the sake of her own son, and with the hopes that he might somehow miraculously survive, she's now out there gathering sticks, trying to ignore the hunger pains and the fatigue and the exhaustion. And she bends over and down to pick up dead, dry wood. And she sees in the corner of her eye, from a distance, a figure of a man approaching the town gates. And as he draws near, she can tell by his attire that this stranger was a Jew. And as she wondered what this Jew is doing in these parts, they're not welcome here. And yet, as he draws closer to her, she marvels at the fact that he looks relatively healthy, well-fed, and almost portly in appearance. Well, of course, she had no clue that this man of God has been fed daily by the rains sent from God. And as the stranger, this middle-aged man, a Jewish man, walks up to the window, to this widow, he makes a request. May I have some water to drink? Now she is preparing to die with barely enough energy to complete her chores. And this stranger has the audacity to ask her for a drink. Her precious water. What would you do? What would you say? I know what I'm going to say if I was in her shoes. I say, what's up with you, guy? You know? Get your own water, stranger. I got to worry about myself and my son. Or, here, man, I'm the last person in the world you should be asking for provisions, Buster. Or at least, out of politeness, you might say, I'm sorry, sir, I can't help you. Perhaps some wealthy citizen in this town could be of assistance. But instead, she offers no resistance at all. I mean, she quickly gets up and hurries over to where the water jug is and gave it to the man. But then he pushes the issue. Madam, while you're at it, could you also give me a little bread to eat? Because I'm hungry. I've walked for miles, as a matter of fact, 70 miles under this desert sun, and I'm starving. Who is this guy? Who's this man? And she turns to the prophet and sadly confesses her plight, and she says, you know, I only have enough flour and oil to make one last meal for me and my son. Understand? One last meal. That's all I have. One last meal. And she explains further that they are starving and near the point of death. Now, look, after an explanation like that, one might expect an apology out of Elijah. But instead, he is even more pervasive. Well then, he exclaims, please use the last of your flour and the last of your oil, and make me a cake of bread and let me eat. And then he adds, God has promised that if you will serve me with what you have, he will take care of you. What would you do? In this story, real giving came in a series of steps. Trusting God in a situation such as this is just frightening. It's scary. In this story, real giving comes in steps. The first step toward real giving is to believe. The woman believed in the God of Israel long before she thought of giving her last meal to Elijah. In her first conversation with Elijah, she utters a vow in the name of Elijah's God, the God of Israel. It says in Scripture, as surely as the Lord your God. Now, she's not a Jew. but she lives adjacent to Israel. Her statement here revealed that she believed that Israel's God is real and true and holy and present. And so here she evidences a belief of God. The second step is to test her by asking for a smaller need first. How about a drink? Now, water is scarce because of the drought. And so he starts with a lesser need. Instead of ignoring him, this woman, man, immediately goes off to give this foreigner a drink of water. Now, the third step of her journey toward real getting is the greatest one. When she is on her way to get water for Elijah, Elijah says, "Oh, by the way, could I have some bread too?" Now, she digs her heels, man, because as she says to him, she did not object about the water to drink, but now she digs her heels because she says, "Now, you know, your God knows. He's watching me. I don't have much. As a matter of fact, I'm down to just a handful of barley flour and a little oil. I've got enough only for one more meal, and then we are going to cash in, and we are going to die. Looks like you had your 3, 4, 5 square meals a day. You don't look like you're famished, and not all. But listen, we're going to eat this with my son, we're going to do this, and we are going to die." She finds this kind of courageous giving more than she can handle, more than she can do. A drink of water, that I can. I can give you that, I can share that with you. To give our last meal? You're kidding me, that's a bit much. She's afraid, she's scared. But in Elijah's response, we understand the nature of real giving because he challenges her, man, in spite of her fear, to give to God first and watch God supply. He knows it's a challenge for her. But because of his own history, because of his experience, his personal encounter with God, of seeing God miraculously providing for his needs, he gives her the opportunity to give. And he says to her, "Go and do what you were planning to do. Go and bake some bread, but bring to me first, some to me first, and then go make some for your family." So he encourages her, even provokes her toward real giving by reminding her of the promises of God. And the promise of God is this: your flour will not run out. Your oil will never run out the whole time of this drought. Others will struggle, but God will take care of you. There was a man who was lost in the desert. And after wandering for many, many, many hours in the desert, his throat became very, very dry. And he needed a drink of water, or else he'll die. And about that time, from a distance, he saw a little shack. And he made his way slowly over to the shack. And when he got there, he found a water pump with a small jug of water on the side, and there's a note as well on the other side of the pump. The note read, "Pour all the water into the top of the pump and to prime it. If you do this, you will get all the water you need." Now, the man had a choice to make. If he trusted the note and poured the water and it worked, he would have all the water that he needs. And if it didn't work, he would still be thirsty and he might die. Or he could choose to drink the water in the jug and get an immediate satisfaction, but it might not be enough and he still might die. So after thinking about it for a moment, he decided to risk it. And so he took the jug of water and poured it in the pump and started pumping and priming the pump. All right? And so, in the beginning, nothing happened, but he got a little scared, but he kept on going and started, and then water a little started coming out of the pump, and so much water came. After that, he drank all that he wanted. He took a shower and filled all the containers he could find, because he was willing to give up momentary satisfaction. He got all the water he needed. Now, the note also says, after you have finished, please refill the jug for the next traveler. And the man refilled the jug and added to the note, please prime the pump. Believe me, it works. Now, we have the same choice to make. Do we hold on to what we have because we don't believe there are better things in store for us and settle for immediate satisfaction? Or do we trust God and give up all that we have and get what God has promised us? I think the choice is obvious. We need to pour in all the water, trust God with everything. And then, once we have experienced what God has to offer, we need to tell others, go prime the pump. Believe me, it works. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the essence of what Elijah is trying to convey to the woman, to the widow. He was trying to say, go ahead. I know. I have experience. I have proven that God's promises are true, that stuff works. You see what options are against the widow? She can trust what she sees. She can hoard it away. She can keep it, make a final meal for her family, and then die. Or she can do the courageous thing of trusting what she cannot see, believing the promise of God, giving her food away to the man of God, believing that God will provide in a miraculous way. That is the challenge. You see the point? If we're going to become real givers, folks, it is going to take a series of steps. It's going to take giving our hearts to God. It is going to take giving to Him in smaller ways until we get to the point where we will give to Him first and then in a radical way. We are forced to depend on Him to supply all of these things. It is a process. When we give courageously, it unleashes and frees God to do amazing things on our behalf. And that is the kind of giving that unleashes God to provide in His own miraculous way. This is an amazing combination, folks. What Elijah did and what the woman did. Through their joint faith, God began to shine in the whole entire Gentile region. Elijah knows from experience, right? God's care, God's provision. And so now she challenges this widow to give. The widow courageously then responds, based not on what she can see, what she can handle, what she can feel, no, but based on the promises of God spoken by the prophet. He responds and gives it all. Elijah comes to a destitute woman and challenges her to give in a courageous way. Now, that must not have been an easy thing for Elijah to do, right? But he knew God will provide. He called her to give, knowing that God will come in and reveal Himself to her by providing for her in a miraculous way. And then she does something too. She courageously responds and gives. She goes off and bakes and takes the first bread to the man of God, believing that God will provide. Now, look at the results. First, Elijah has food to eat every day. It's a great provision from God. This was not a safe place for him to be, obviously, but this is where God instructed him to stay. I have commanded a widow, and the word is there again, there to sustain you. There it is again. And so for almost 2 years, God takes care of his needs through an impoverished, stressed out single mother, God miraculously provided where? There. Are you there? And here's the second great truth. The woman and her son have food throughout that whole period round.